Hey everyone, and welcome to the Monetize Your Expertise podcast. I'm your host, Grant Weherley, the online course guy helping you every week to monetize your expertise. Just go to myepodcast.com for tools and links and more for all episodes. Hey everybody, and welcome to the Monetize Your Expertise podcast. Today I'm here with Danny Iny, founder of Miracy and author of multiple books, including Teach and Grow Rich, as well as host of the Business Reimagined podcast. Thanks for joining me today, Danny.
Grant, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, and so tell us a bit about what you do, about what you focus on, and what your core competencies are in business.
Sure. So what we do is we teach online marketing, but with a very different spin and approach than most of what you see online. Most of what people teach out there, it's really kind of tactic and strategy oriented. You know, how do I optimize my funnel? How do I run this campaign? How do I get traffic or whatever it is? Our focus is really on putting the audience first. And we teach people how to attract and engage the audience that is going to really appreciate what they want to put out into the world and then create value for them. And so we talk about audience building, we talk about relationships, and a big kick of ours recently has been course building because education is something that's near and dear to my heart.
Good stuff. Definitely resonates with me as well. It's something I'm really into. And actually, yeah, I'm very familiar with your work, and I do got to say I love what you do, and I love how it's very it is. I would agree. It's very much different than the traditional online marketing approach. It's very much audience first, very systematic and analytical, and it's not just like do these flashy tactics. It's got, it's a very strategic, and I really appreciated that. And also, particularly the audience first thing, I really agree with that very strongly because I actually talk about this all the time, is that a lot of the course instructors that I talk to or work with, it's really so easy to be like, I want to build something about this, or I want to make this. Like it's self-focused rather than audience-focused, but at the end of the day, the audience is actually what's going to pay for it. So so it totally resonates with me as well. And so I'm curious, how did you originally get into this kind of thing?
Well, the story is, I like to say I've been an entrepreneur for longer than my adult life. I quit school when I was 15 to start my first business.
No way, that's interesting. What was it?
Well, back in the day, I knew a little bit of HTML, and so I thought I would build websites, which of course, knowing a little bit of HTML does not qualify you to build websites. And I bounced around between a whole bunch of different projects and startups before landing in the educational technology world. And, through a bunch of twists and turns, my first moderately sized, I won't say big because, say big startup, you're thinking Silicon Valley, but, my first startup where I had outside investors and employees and all that kind of stuff was in 2007. And we were building software that teaches kids how to read, which was a really great experience, something I very deeply cared about. But I was a young and inexperienced CEO in what, in hindsight, is probably the most complicated industry on the face of the earth. And right at the same time that the markets crashed, and all that together just destroyed the company. So it all fell apart. I had to let my employees go. I had to tell my investors that their money was gone. And I wasn't comfortable doing that. I felt a lot of personal responsibility. And so I took a lot of those losses on myself personally. And so I walked away from that with about $250,000 in personal debt.
Wow.
But you've got to do the right thing.
Yeah, for sure.
That's kind of what it came down to for me. But from there, I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do next? Now, I'd been helping people with their marketing and strategy for a long time, and I'd certainly learned a lot from that experience. So I rebuilt my consulting practice, serving small business owners and entrepreneurs, helping them with their marketing and their strategy. And I built a pretty good, successful practice serving these small business owners. And I found that, my sweet spot is kind of 0 to 10 employees. And I like to say closer to 0 than to 10. And I found that there were enough people in that set who were doing well, their businesses were succeeding, and they could afford my services, and that's what drove the growth of my practice. There were also a lot of people who could not afford anything because they weren't doing well at all, and they needed a ton of help. And I found that I was giving away a lot of my time for free, which is fine. A lot of people helped me out for free when I was getting started. That's just how it works. You pay it forward. But it wasn't scalable. And so I was like, well, what if I were to create some kind of resource that would help people get the help that they need at scale in a way that was accessible to everyone who needed it? And that was kind of the impetus for what at the time became Firepole Marketing in late 2010, early 2011.
Good stuff. That was an awesome story. And actually, I do like to always ask in interviews, actually later in the interview, when's the time you felt like a failure? But it's interesting how like you've definitely already touched on that question. And I imagine that sounds like a really hard place to be. And so to step back to that part where you kind of did lose everything and had to completely start over. Actually, that's another question I like to ask: is how would you start over? Well, you've actually done it, so that's really interesting. And I'm curious, like what was that like? So if you sit there and you've got $250,000 in debt, I'm curious about how do you go forward from that? I mean, like how can you logistically continue to like move forward? What was your approach to doing that? I mean, yeah, I know you got into consulting, but like, can you just like kind of walk me through? Because I'm just very fascinated by these kinds of stories. Talking to some people who they're millionaires and then they're like several million in debt, and I'm always just fascinated about what they kind of do on a daily basis once they've like hit that bottom.
Sure. So, I mean, there's the logistical, what do you do? But there's also the mental, how do you handle it? Because as entrepreneurs, we attach a lot of our identity to what we're doing and to the results. And so there's kind of a narrative arc that we don't just, when we tell our story or we tell our experience, it's not just a series of events. There's like a rising drama, there's a narrative arc leading somewhere. And so when you've got your story and everything is leading up to this, culminating moment, except that it didn't work out great, it was a disaster, it kind of switches the whole story in your mind from an exciting, happy story to a tragedy. And it really takes a mental reframe to say, well, no, the story didn't end there, right? This wasn't the last chapter. This was a plot twist. But you have to you have to reframe the whole story in your head. A lot of the pain that we experience, it comes from the gap between where we are and where we thought we would be, and not wanting to let go of where we thought we would be. So a lot of it comes down to, okay, like this is where I am. What can I do from here? As opposed to trying to like recover where I thought I would be. But like that's, it's futile. You work from where you are. And logistically, that's exactly what you do. I have a mug that, whenever I'm frustrated or in a challenging spot, I grab it because I choose the mug with the phrase that kind of frames my intention. And it says, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. And it sounds straightforward, but it's really profound. It's like, what do? You start where you are, you use what you have, and you do what you can, because that's all there is. So if you've got $250,000 in debt, let's look at what's realistic. I had people who, they wanted large chunks of money from me, and it's like, look, I don't have it. I'm going to pay it, but I don't have it. So let's consolidate. Let's work out a payment schedule where here's a payment that I can make every month. And once that's figured out, it doesn't matter that there's $250,000 in debt or whatever the big number is. It just matters that this is the payment I have to make every month. And ideally, you want to make the minimum payment and a little more, right? As long as you're accelerating the pace, it's fine. So you work on kind of rebuilding your life, rebuilding your practice. And you recognize that, and this is where I think a lot of people would take this in the wrong direction. Okay, with $250,000 in debt, you've just got to put everything towards paying off your debt. And I didn't do that. And it's not that I didn't take my commitment seriously. It's that if I had put everything I had towards paying off my debt and I'd lived off of peanut butter and bread for the rest of my life, it still would have taken like decades, right? Because that's just a lot of money. It's like, it's going to take forever. And so the fastest way for me to repay that debt and get back on my feet, while still making all my minimum payments, of course, and a little more ideally, was to increase my earning power. So to focus on doing the things that would increase my reach and my ability and my leverage. To my mind, wealth is misunderstood by a lot of people. A lot of people think wealth is a function of the money you have in the bank or your kind of total assets or something, assets minus liabilities. And there's something to that, obviously, especially if you're in a traditional job where your income is quite fixed. But for someone in an entrepreneurial context, the money in the bank is a trailing indicator. It's really more about your earning power. It's about if everything was taken away, what is your ability to create value and by extension create wealth starting from scratch, like in terms of what what you can do, what you can help people with. So my focus was, okay, let's make the minimum payments and let's focus all the rest of my effort on expanding my ability to create value.
You just dropped so many value bombs in that and that storyline. That was really valuable. And I hope anybody who's listening, I hope you guys like save this interview. And if you ever get into a hard place where you like you fail at something, you work towards something, and it doesn't go as you planned, I hope you really listen to that, just that one part of the last like 5 minutes of what you were saying, because I think that was extremely sobering, really profound, and I really appreciate you sharing all of that. And I actually want to go back a second to the first thing that you said about the story arc. I really love the way you put that. Yeah, I very much agree with that. You've got this story of you're working towards this particular goal, and it's gonna work out a particular way, and you have this really flashy image maybe in your head about how it's gonna look, which, by the way, very rarely is quite as flashy as you're imagining it when you're trying to motivate yourself towards it. But then when it fails completely, and it's not only not flashy, but like very flashily bad, I really think there's a strong cognitive dissonance in that.
Mm-hmm.
You have to reframe your story arc again because it breaks what you originally had as your story, and it makes you question everything that you just had as your story leading up to that point. So basically, if you have this story of like, oh, I'm working towards something great and awesome, etc., and then you fail miserably, it just shatters that and instantly causes you to be like, well, wait a second, was I spending all of my time for nothing? You question that story arc, and then you have to rebuild it from scratch into something that's positive. And so, yeah, I think that's, it's been very consistent with my experience too. I know tons of people who've been through similar experiences, and it's definitely a great way of putting it. And so again, anybody who's listening, please save that, because that was, I think if you guys listen to that when you're in a tough spot, I think that'll really help.
And for anyone who is listening to this in a tough spot, like there's the theory, and then how do you do it? The solution, the strategy is to talk to people, right? Because our tendency is, well, I'm embarrassed. I'm ashamed. I don't want to tell anyone about this until I figure it out. And first of all, it's very isolating. It's very, very difficult. But the way that we rewrite that narrative is by talking to people. When you tell someone what happened and they ask you questions, and it's like, well, are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? Where are you going to go? You start through conversation rewriting that story. You find the better way, the more constructive way to tell that story and to interpret kind of all those experiences. So for a lot of reasons, like the solution is talk to people, bring people in on what you're going through, because it's a big part of the process of reframing where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in addition to talking to people, I think something I've found very helpful is whenever you start to internally create these really negative dialogues and negative explanations for something, you start to turn that really positive story of how you're working towards something greater into something very negative when you start to question it. It's just really helpful to actually take a second look, and it's like, I've got a really negative explanation of everything going on in my head right now. And then if you really look at it closely, and you even just objectively, you realize, oh wow, this is like, there's all these assumptions here. This is a very one-sided view of everything, and there's all these other perspectives that are much more balanced and grounded. There's a lot of things you can do, but it is really difficult to get out of that initially without these kinds of strategies. So I want to transition now, because I know you're awesome with courses, and that's one of the things that online education and courses in particular. I'd love to talk more about that with you and pick your brain a little bit, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
So again, like I said, I really love how you're very systematic and put the audience first. There's no like flashy marketing gimmicks about the kinds of things that you do and you help people with. So, I mean, I'm curious from your perspective, what are the key elements of instructors and courses that succeed versus the types of patterns that are consistent in courses that fail?
I think it comes down to the creation process. Building a course, creating an educational experience that will be valuable is complex. It's a complex task, and that's not to say it's impossibly hard or difficult. There's complexity, and the more complex something is, the less likely you are to get it completely right on your first attempt. Right, the first time you step up to the plate, you're not likely to hit a home run, and yet that's kind of what people act as though they expect when they're building a course. They have this idea for what they want to create, which is hopefully, but not necessarily, based on what the market is actually telling them that it wants. And then they go to their bat cave for like 6 months or a year or longer to build out this massive course. And then they reemerge into the world with this thing that they built, totally disconnected from the market that they're looking to serve, the student body they're looking to support. And they hope that somebody's going to want to buy it. They hope that it will create a good outcome. And you can get lucky. Monkeys on a keyboard can type Shakespeare occasionally, but I wouldn't bet on it. The much smarter approach is a very rapid iterative piloting approach. So think about whatever it is the topic that you want to teach and narrow it down to the minimum viable outcome that people would be happy to pay money to learn. Okay, so what can you, and a good thought exercise is in the context of the topic that you want to teach. Imagine you just got on a plane from New York to Chicago. It's about a 2 hour and 15-minute flight. And just as the plane starts taxiing down the runway, you start talking to the person sitting next to you and you hit it off. And you realize that this person is exactly your perfect target customer, your perfect target student. And they desperately need your help. And you're really getting along, so you want to help them. The only constraint is that you have 2 hours and then, you land and you go your separate ways. So what could you teach? What could you deliver in just those 2 hours that would be the most impactful for them? So really confining and constraining what is the scope of what you can offer to people. And then instead of spending an enormous amount of time building it, I hate pre-recorded videos for a first draft of a course. I think pre-recorded videos are great for a finished course in concordance with other ways of supporting students depending on what's needed. But for a first draft, I would reach out to your market, say, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to put this course together because I think there's a demand. People are asking me for it. If you're interested, I'm looking for my first 10, 15, 20, whatever, X number of charter students who are going to be in the course. They're going to experience it live from me. They're going to get a ton of personal attention, and you're going to get a big discount for being first in exchange for your feedback on how to make it better. And kind of go through that process with them, see what's working, see what's not, learn how to improve. And what that means is that you don't need to spend as much time preparing the course, not because you're being sloppy, but because you're allowing yourself the flexibility to adapt on the fly based on what your students actually need. It's a better experience for them. You're going to be faster to market. And the end result is that you're going to create a course that's better for everyone.
I agree 10,000% with everything you just said. And one of the first things you said, which was course creation is actually quite complex. I actually sat down one day and just in like 5 minutes, I was like, what are all of the things that actually go into building and marketing a course? And I sat down and wrote. It was really, really, really long list. It was like at least 20 or 30 things, and I didn't even spend that much time on it. Because when you first go into something new, whether it's courses or something else, it's really easy to have a very, very simple mental image of what that looks like. And, obviously, if you're watching a little 5-minute YouTube video about like, oh, here's how you can do SEO, or here's how you can create courses or something, like it's always a very simplified initial impression. You're like, oh, this should be easy. I just got to learn how to make some content and then like it'll just sell and I'll have a great course. Cool. But then when you dive into it, there's, of course, so many different variables, so many different ways things can go wrong, or so many different skills you have to develop. As you mentioned, in terms of the complexity of the task, I think the reason why it's difficult to succeed at something that's complex is because, there's all of these new things that you're doing, right? Especially with, or speaking particularly to courses, there's not only do you have to like learn how to make good content, to like refine your knowledge on the topic, you have to learn how to sort of structure a course, which is a pretty interesting and unique thing. You have to learn how to do all of the different marketing stuff around it. You have to learn how to interview customers. There's a bazillion different things. And I think you're very right. And I think a lot of people don't really understand that going into it. And then they have unrealistic expectations and they get disappointed. So I like that.
I'm glad you brought up the content and the information, because that's really, really important. And often when I talk about when I talk about the complexity, people think I'm talking about like, figuring out videos is complicated, or hosting your files, or no, it's really about the content, because building a course is not an exercise in showing off how much you know about a topic. It's not about the information. It's not even about explaining all the information well. It's really about the learning outcomes, which lead to real world outcomes for your students. And that's a difficult switch for people to make. And even if you make that switch in your mind, it's hard to execute it without the feedback of students, because it's very, the curse of knowledge. You're just cursed by your in-depth knowledge of the topic. It's very hard to gauge and remember what it was like when you were just getting started and these were all unfamiliar ideas.
That's so true. And actually, probably the number one thing that I personally struggle with, being totally open here, the number one thing I struggle with is when I make a course, I always want to like put everything I know into it and like just be as helpful as possible. But I know it's also a common mistake, which is, here, let me like overwhelm you with all of these different things that you're not ready for. And so I think that's another common mistake, very much along the lines of what you're saying, and one that I still struggle with, just because I get all excited and I want to like share everything that I know, but sometimes you have to hold back and make it very, very structured in a way that you do have to go back to where you were just learning it. And that can be almost impossible to remember because it might be like 10 or 20 years for you. And so, yeah, it's absolutely the best way to do that is to actually talk to them, to iterate, to get that feedback, because you're not going to nail it the first time. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why, for example, professors or like extreme experts in particular areas aren't always the best teachers.
Mm-hmm. A good analogy. I used to do a lot of martial arts when I was younger. And I remember, I started studying jiu-jitsu. I was like 15 or 16, and I did it for many years. And so, as you rise up the ranks, as you become more adept, the stuff you're learning becomes more complex because you understand the fundamentals, right? So a beginner's class would be, they're teaching you how to punch. And so they're going to break down the punch into, 6 different steps. You're going to hold your arm like this, and you're going to push it forward and rotate your shoulders or your hips. You're going to turn your hand this way. Like, breaking a really simple move into all its component steps so you can practice and master it. Then you get to an advanced class, and it'll be something like, so the guy throws a punch, so you're going to step out, block, turn around, grab with the other arm, step into a flip, roll him over, and then put him into this lock. Which, to a beginner, they're like, what? I didn't get any of that. But it's because you're speaking in a vocabulary that people understand. I know what stepping out and turning to a throw means. I know what the component parts of that are, so I don't need that to be explained, right? Because you have that level of skill. You've got to remember, if someone is at a point where they don't know the vocabulary, don't try to help them construct things with the vocabulary. You've got to just help them understand the vocabulary first.
Yeah, I love how you bring up the topic of language as well. So even beyond just conceptually overwhelming people, the way that you have to speak to where your audience is at. I did a webinar a couple days ago, and that was one of the topics I brought up because I had a call with a guy who's building a course last week, and basically there was that issue where it was an intro course, but it was using all of the buzzwords around the topic, like almost assuming that they were already familiar with the course content in order to actually explain what it was about. So it was this catch-22 that's like, well, if they need the intro course, they're not going to be familiar with those words, and so they're either not going to understand them or it's not really going to resonate. Mm-hmm. Or if they are familiar, they're not going to need the course. So it's just like, it's kind of, it's a really important thing that I think is easy to overlook, which is you not only have to like teach to where your students are at, but you also have to even speak to them where they're at. And sometimes that can mean keeping down the jargon and lingo, even though it might be a natural part of your vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
So I know you've already kind of started over from scratch when you went into debt and had to rebuild everything. But I'm curious, of course, every time you go through something, you learn a lot from the process. And I'd love to know if that happened again today, did you think you went about that the right way, or did you learn something from that? Do you think you could have done that better? Like, how would you start over from scratch if that happened to you again today or tomorrow?
I don't think it's a matter of right way or wrong way. I think it's just a matter of, did it work? And how well did it work? And is there a better way? Like, what did I learn? And yes, of course, it worked well. And I'm, all things considered, I went from $250,000 in debt to a multiple 7-figure successful company in about 7-8 years. And, had a pretty good life along the way, most of the way. So I call that a success. But yeah, I think I could do better just because I know more and I have more to bring to the table. So, if everything was taken away, the first thing I would probably be a lot more diligent about or vigilant against, I should say, is when my startup imploded, like I spent a year, 2 years maybe, like trying to recover it. Even though like the writing was on the wall, there was no money to be had from investors, like that just wasn't going to happen. If something isn't working, if it's dead in the water, just recognize that and move on. Mourn for it. It's not an easy experience, but trying to revive something that's dead is usually not a very successful strategy. And it's tricky, right? It's always like, you never give up, but know when to quit. Like it's easy to say, but it's hard to know where to draw that line.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to get at. Is I'm curious, how do you know, in your opinion, how would you say, what's that threshold to where it's like going from persevering and working to overcome a failure versus it's time to cut your losses and move on.
Well, something that I've become a lot more mindful of lately in general in my business is entrepreneurs have a tendency to try to bootstrap everything, and it's a very admirable tendency to try to do things without the resources, without kind of putting what they need to into it in a perfect world. And I'm all for that. I'm all for finding out if things can work without having to put in more than you need. And the piloting process I just described is very much a part of that. But at the same time, you want to properly resource projects. You want to give them a shot so that at the end of that shot, you can say either, okay, this worked and that's great, or this didn't work and we've got to let it go. You don't want to be like, well, it didn't work, but it's because we weren't able to do this and we didn't do that. And you don't want to kind of give it a shot, but then not know if it didn't work because it just isn't going to work, or it didn't work because you didn't put time and energy into it. So I would be a lot more, or at least I would try to be a lot more objective about, okay, this is a situation. This is what I'm going to try. When will I know if this has succeeded or not? And when will I know that, okay, it hasn't succeeded and I'm moving on? I think there's perseverance is good, but there's a romanticization of just perseverance for the sake of perseverance. Like it's not romantic or special to push through adversity just for the sake of pushing through adversity. I mean, pushing through adversity is important in pursuit of something that matters and when it's properly directed.
Absolutely. And you kind of just reminded me of, I think it was a couple of months ago, I heard a really interesting tiny little bit from an interview. I think it was somebody was interviewing Tim Ferriss, I think it was. And basically they were talking about like trying new projects. Like you're starting something new. How do you do that in the most productive way possible? And kind of speaking to this point of how do you know when something's a success or if it's failure, and how do you know when to cut that project and move on? And I really liked what he said, which, maybe it's not a full answer, but it has stuck with me. And so I'd like to share that, which is basically, if you're going to start something new, have a very clear criteria for what your definition of success is going into it. And also pick your projects based on, even if it does fail, you're one, prepared to lose what you're investing in it, and two, you'll at the very least come away with some very specific valuable skill, even if you've lost whatever resources you dedicated towards it. So I was like, that's amazing. That's such a clear little formula for like a very productive, kind of efficient way of picking projects and defining them as well. So I really like that. I was wondering if that's something that you'd agree with as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so here's the thing. Sometimes you don't achieve big things without taking big risks, in the sense of, maybe I'll go down this path and I'm not going to see a return. And that's okay if it's important to you and you feel like it's worth justifying the risk. There's two things to consider. The first is you want to cap your downside. People who've become very successful, they've learned to cap their downsides. Like, even if this doesn't work out, how bad is it really going to be? How much do I stand to lose? Yes, I'll lose the time, I'll lose the energy, I'll lose the etc. But cap your downside. That's really, really important. And second, energy and effort, well applied, lead to experience, which leads to valuable judgment. And I've seen over and over and over again in my life that things I've learned, things I've experienced come up again and they prove to be valuable. And it's usually not in the way I would have expected. So if you're tackling a challenging problem and you're giving it your all and you're being smart about learning from the experience, that doesn't go away. Like that's something that you garner and keep.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting that you brought that up. It makes me think of the fact that, as a specific example of what you just said, I used to box and I also used to dance. And so I've dabbled in some martial arts and some dance stuff. And you would never think this, just getting started in either of those things, but actually learning about either a martial arts or dancing helps you do the other in a very clear, surprising way. And I thought that was so interesting. I never would have expected that in a million years. So yeah, I totally agree that learning valuable skills is valuable, and you never know how it's gonna pay off down the road. And whether that's physical skills or mental skills or social skills.
Absolutely.
So one thing I do want to talk about that we kind of brought up right before we actually started recording. I know a lot of people know about you and Firepole Marketing, but apparently you're going to now rebrand it, and I'm really fascinated about branding recently. So I'm very curious about what was the impetus, what was the inspiration behind rebranding Firepole Marketing?
Yeah, so I mean, as of right now, we're recording this, and it's still Firepole Marketing. But by the time this airs, Firepole Marketing won't exist anymore. The company is called Miracy, And the reason for that is like I never liked the name Firepole Marketing. I started it with a partner a million years ago. It feels like he hasn't been involved for a very long time. He was kind of involved in the early days when he had a kid and his priorities shifted. But we had breakfast looking for like, what are we going to call our business? And we, had a computer open. We were searching .coms, and everything was taken. And after an hour, we were both exhausted. It was like, well, what about Firepole? Like, what about, when your business is burning down, you don't have time for the stairs. We're like, yeah, okay, that kind of works. The .com was free, and we took it. Now, we never did anything with that messaging. That's not what we're about. We're not about like fast first response. We're about real stability and foundations and building something real. And I kind of sent an email back in April, April Fool's. So, it's a little joke, but kind of foreshadowing this, saying that, I hate the name, and it's led us to the real opportunity, which is we get tons of Google searches for people who are looking for stripper poles, and we're going to shift the focus of our business. It was April Fool's. It was a joke, but like it's a name that is misleading. It makes it, people think we're a marketing agency, which we're not. We're an education company. So it was, and this is part of why, when people are obsessing about what to call their company, I'm like, just pick something and move forward. You can always change it later. Firepole's a stupid name, and we've still done very well. So all that being said, it's a name that kind of fit where we were when we were getting started. We were going to do some marketing consulting and some marketing courses, and over time, it became less and less and less relevant. Now, there are two kinds of rebrands that you see. There's the rebrand, which is, let's call it aspirational, which is, our company sucks, our vision or our drive or our perception in the marketplace sucks. Let's change our name to fix it, right? Like when Philip Morris changed their name to, I don't know, Altria or something like that. It's like, between the lines, what are they saying? It's like, we don't sell tobacco anymore. It's just, unicorns and rainbows here. Like, that doesn't really work. Like, people don't fall for that stuff. But then there's the rebrand, and this is what I think we're actually doing, where the public perception, the world's perception of who you are and what you do, and your perception of who you are and what you do have evolved beyond what the name was and what the look was. And what you're really doing is bringing that label, bringing that look and feel up to speed with where you are in a way that opens doors for where you want to go. And that's what we're doing. Miracy is a play on vision, on seeing things that aren't quite there yet, but you're going to make them there. You're going to make them happen. The theme is, my podcast is called Business Reimagined, and the theme of Miracy is to reimagine business. It's that it doesn't have to be what you've always seen. It can be something more, something greater, and something better. And this is what we've already been about. We're just bringing our name and our look up to speed with who we actually are and where we're going.
And so you spent about an hour deciding on Firepole Marketing. So I'm curious how much time and also how did you go about deciding on the new name Miracy?
That's a great question. We spent an awful lot more than an hour. Like I wrestled with looking for a name that kind of captured what I wanted for about a year. And then I gave up because I was unsuccessful. We hired a naming consultant, a woman, she's named cars for big car companies and, credit cards for banks, and like naming things is her job. And we paid her a nice chunk of money, and we got to work, and we went back and forth, and she proposed in 5 rounds or so, like, I don't know, 100, 200 names before we arrived at Miracy. And it's complicated. Like I didn't realize how complicated it is, because there's the name, and then you need the .com, and you need to make sure it doesn't infringe on anybody else's intellectual property. Like there was a name that we were looking at earlier in the process that was great, and there was a .com that kind of worked, and then we were like, oh no, but IBM would sue us, so that doesn't work. So it which is part of why we went with a coined name. It's like something that we can own, and we don't have to kind of elbow our way through the intellectual property stuff. It was a much, much longer process.
So, if you don't mind sharing, I'd love to hear some of the other names that stuck out with you out of the list of ones that were proposed.
No, honestly, there's nothing that really stuck out. Like finding the right name, it's kind of like, do you have kids?
No, I don't.
Okay, so I have a daughter who's 5 months and change old as we record this. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, finding a name for a company is a lot like finding a name for a child. Like you go through a lot of names that it's like just no, it's not right, doesn't work. and they don't really stick in your mind. It's like, it's not that you find the name that's an 80% match and then you find the name that's 100% match. It's like, it's almost binary. It's either they're not a fit or they are. And this one, Miracy just works. Miracy is who we are.
Nice, good stuff. And so I'm guessing for your daughter, you also spent more than an hour deciding her name.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
we spent an awful lot of time finding the name that just fit.
And so actually, one thing, this is kind of a tangent, but in terms of those gut decisions about things like a name or sometimes like design or things that are often gut-based decision, I always kind of think about in the back of my head when you're having to make those kinds of decisions, how subjective they are. And also, like, on any given day, I always think about, like, what if, I saw, or like, what if you, for example, you saw the name Miracy the first time, like on a Monday when you were feeling great versus on a Wednesday where you're feeling terrible, and your gut-based decision was very contextually based on how you were feeling at the time versus like the name itself. Do you know what I mean by that?
I think that's always a factor. That's why you want to look at stuff when you're in the right frame of mind. You want to put it down. You want to come back to it. But part of what we were looking for, and Miracy is a coined name. In other words, it's a made-up name. It's not an existing word. And it is a play on vision, seeing, and mira is vision in Spanish and stuff like that. So it does connote things that we want to speak to, but it's a coined name, which means that it's in a way it's a vessel, it's a receptacle for what we want to put into it, which gives us a lot more freedom and flexibility than having to, how are people going to perceive this in relation to what they already know? This is new. This is like, it allows us to turn it into what we want. It's kind of like, if you were to name your child after a very famous actor or figure in history, then there's already a mental and emotional charge to that name that people have to start with when they meet the person, then kind of, navigate away from. And that isn't the case here. So whatever the initial perception, it's not going to be a very strong initial perception, so we can take it in the direction that we want it to go. Or, at least that's the thinking in my head. This might be one of those things that works great in my head, but not in real life. We'll see.
We'll see indeed. But there's always the decision between, I find when it comes to names, the decision between something that's individual, maybe a new word, and it's very, very, very branded, versus the like very, very functional name of like there are already existing words and you're basically just describing what you do. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are about that of those two routes, and if you think it's always better to go branded or if there's particular applications of each.
Well, I think it's a matter of, and I'm not an expert at this, which is why we reached out to a consultant to help us, but a lot of it comes down to your positioning and what you're trying to go for. Like, I'll use an example. I'm a big fan of Tesla Motors, the car company. Tesla is very clearly a premium brand. They sell, I won't say luxury, even though it is a luxury car, but they sell high-end stuff. They sell quality, right? And they have a name. You would never expect that level of quality from a company that was bestelectriccars.com. Right, bestelectriccars.com. You'd expect it to be like, cheap, best value, something or other. It's not. You don't expect a premium brand. So that's a consideration. But again, this is not my expertise.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, though. And I'm just trying to think of examples. And generally speaking, it does seem like the really big and especially really premium type companies. You think about especially like fashion brands or like names of like high-end liquors and stuff like that. It's always some like kind of interesting random word or like a word in a different language versus like, oh, this is the best vodka. Go out and buy the best vodka for $1,000. Of course, nobody would buy that. So there is another topic I'd love to dive into with you as well before we close things out, and that is your recent book launch. So tell me about that. How did that go for you?
It went phenomenally well. The book is called Teach and Grow Rich. It was downloaded. The book is literally it launched 28 days ago as we record this, and it's been downloaded in the range of about 20,000 times since then, which I'm thrilled with. It's got like 150 something reviews on Amazon, average of 4.5 stars. I'm very, very happy with the way it went, particularly because this is, I've written books before and they've done well, but it's the book I'm most proud of. The books I've written previously, they were, here's what the market wanted, so I created it for them, or I'm teaching something that, people have been asking me for. This is more like, these are ideas that I think are important I was putting forward. So I wasn't quite as sure how it would be received. I'm very gratified that it was well received. But interestingly, something that really helped the book to do well was that we tied the launch of the book in with the launch of my course, the Course Builders Laboratory. And the reason that matters is that, first of all, when people read the book and they want to go further, there is an avenue for them to do that. But of course, a big part of our strategy is we have our joint venture partners who help us spread the word about the things that we're doing that they believe in. And I like to think that if I had just published a book, a lot of people would have still helped me to spread the word. But there's only so much that they can do in order to spread the word, because you can't dedicate a week or 2 weeks on your calendar to just promoting the book when there's no financial return for doing so. Not because people are greedy, but just because people are running a business. If you spend 2 weeks promoting my book, that's 2 weeks you're not spending promoting something else. That's about 4% of your annual revenue that you're giving away, because there's a very, very high opportunity cost. But by tying the book launch in with the course launch, people could promote the book, which they wanted to and believed in, leading into a course that they wanted to promote and believed in. But then when people bought the course, there was a commission opportunity. People were able to earn money by doing so. So there's just the effort was justified on their calendar. And that allowed us to spread the word about the book a lot further than we otherwise could have.
That's great stuff, man. And I want to give you a massive congratulations on that successful book launch. And I also got to say, especially with regards to names, that I really like that name. It's quite clever. It's very descriptive, but also a pun. And
thank you. My wife came up with it.
Good stuff. And yeah, also in terms of how you connected that to a much larger product and building something out in the back end, I think that's phenomenal as well. And it's funny to me. I know a lot of people who they publish some books, or they publish some courses in a variety of kind of scattered products, but it's interesting to see the differences between many businesses where people kind of do that and it's almost like dabbling, but they're all sort of disconnected, versus the very connected, very strategic, where you buy a book and then it sort of funnels into an email list, and then it gives people all these different avenues for moving forward with your brand and your business, and how much more dramatically effective that can be. So I'm curious about if you have any particular strategy that you use to do that through the book. Was it just the standard, for some additional resources, go to this URL, et cetera, or what was your approach there?
Well, there's a little more to it than that. In the book, we create a companion video series that really expands on the ideas of the book. There are companion resources as well. And for people who just want the brain candy of understanding the ideas and where the market is going, there's a lot of kind of trends discussion in the book. Then the book is enough and the videos are enough. But they also kind of introduce the opportunity for, if you want to take this further, and you actually want to do this and apply it yourself, then we have a way to help you do that. Good stuff.
And so I kind of want to get into, it sounds like you're I know you, we've spoken before, you're very reflective, very, very thoughtful, deep thinker type person. And so, especially since you're very interested in education, and that's something that I'm personally also very interested in, I'm curious about your thoughts about the future of education and how that's going to work in society and where you see that going. Because you just mentioned that's something that you've talked about trends and things like that in the book. So on a broader scale and on a longer timeline, where do you see all of this going? Because it's changing so rapidly. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
It's a great question. Yeah, anyone who wants to go deep, you really should read my book, because I'm biased, but I really do think it's good. I think the world of education is changing dramatically. I think right now there's a huge misalignment between what is being promised or expected and what is being delivered. The cost of education is rising. The value being delivered is dropping on a whole bunch of different levels. It's less and less relevant to the modern world. It's more and more disconnected from just things that are important for people to learn. Less and less of a differentiator in terms of helping people succeed in the workforce in their lives. It doesn't equip people to actually succeed very well in their lives. It's more like a bunch of disconnected piece of information that, if you can piece it together to create value for yourself or others, then congratulations. I think it's going to change pretty substantially. I think the monolithic institutions that we're used to seeing, a lot of them are going to kind of disappear over the coming, I want to say 5 to 15 years. I think it's going to be replaced by a much more granular, learn what you want and learn what you need online educational kind of menu delivered by individual subject matter experts. I think there are going to be longer and larger scale courses that have a larger theme, again, kind of put together by subject matter experts, as opposed to being aggregated by a school the way it is now. And I do go into more detail about this in the book.
Yeah, great stuff, and I appreciate you sharing. And I have actually already bought your book, and it's sitting on my list of books to read, and I'm actually really excited to get to it now, because I know the quality of content that you put out, so I'm sure it's fantastic.
Thank you. I'd love to hear what you think of it once you get through it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I honestly, like, it's the thing that I've created in the last several years that I'm most proud of. Like, I was at a business retreat last weekend, and I just came off the launch of my course that was phenomenally well. We made like $2.6 million. And someone came up to me and was like, "Congratulations on your launch." I was like, "Thank you." And he says, "And I read your book and I thought it was really good." And I was like, "Thank you." Like, I was and I just noticed that I was like so much more excited that he liked my book.
Well, yeah, I mean, it does that if it's the project that's really personally meaningful to you. So again, congratulations on that. And again, I'm pumped to read it, and I'll definitely know what I think about it.
Thank you.
So now I'd love to get into a sort of closing segment before I let you go. I've got 3 super quick questions for you, and I'm just curious the sort of rapid fire version of this, if that's good for you. Sound good?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
So number 1, what's a habit that you can't live without?
Habit that I can't live without. So something I do in the morning is, if you're familiar with the 5-minute journal, it's basically like journaling for people who don't journal. But it's not just that I do it to capture, what am I grateful for and what's going to make it a great day and so forth. But I share that with my wife, and it kind of keeps us on the same page. She does the same. That's very valuable to me.
I actually use that exact same app.
Awesome.
So what's a skill that you're much better at than most people?
That is a really good question. I think I'm a good teacher. I'm good at looking at patterns in what is and pulling out the key details and kind of sharing it and explaining it in a way that's clear.
Nice, good answer. It's good for somebody who works with online courses, right? And how did you become good at that? Was it something that you were already good at?
I think it's something I've always been good at. That's like my personal strength.
Nice, good answer. And so what's something you struggle with and you're particularly not good at it?
I'm not a patient person. I don't like to wait. Like, if I'm going to an event or I'm going to a restaurant, there's a line, like, I'll leave. I won't wait in line. I'm a very impatient person. And the bigger and more important things we want to do in life, they take time. They take patience. And that's something that I'm working on.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it hasn't held you back too much. So, and actually, in some ways, I suppose that can be an asset, is you don't settle for waiting in lines, metaphorically or literally. So maybe you save a bunch of time by being impatient.
Maybe, and there's a virtue to it, but there's also room for improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you do have a valid point as well. And actually, as an fellow impatient person, I do agree that it's got its pros and its cons, because you can kind of do things faster, but you also get caught up with maybe avoiding doing things that take a long time but are very much worthwhile. But yeah, so as a final question, what are you working on now? And also, how can people get in touch with you and also particularly find your book?
Well, what I'm working on right now this minute is the rebrand. Like, that's our big, huge thing that's going to go live in a week, which will already have happened when people hear this. The best way to reach me and see my work is at Mirasee, mirasee.com. And you can find my book, Teach and Grow Rich, on Amazon.
Nice. Thank you so much for joining me, Danny. And to everybody listening, again, save that first part. Or actually, there's been a couple parts that I think are super valuable from this interview. But I think that first chunk about going through hard times and sort of the mindset of that, I think that was insanely valuable. And I hope you guys got a lot of value out of that. So thanks again for joining me, Danny.
Thanks for having me.
Hey entrepreneurs and experts, I just wanted to thank you for listening to this episode, and I hope you learned at least one new big idea that helps you evolve your skills and gets you closer to monetizing your expertise and creating that successful knowledge business. Make sure to hit that subscribe button on iTunes and Stitcher, and check out myepodcast.com for all episodes as well as the tips and tricks mentioned in this episode. Thanks again, and I'll see you next week.